Not pain exactly, more like they belonged to someone else. A numbness that crept up from my toes, settling into my calves like frost spreading across glass. I told myself it was nothing. Long hours at work, too much time standing in heels, not enough sleep. The explanations came easily, almost automatically, as if my mind needed to rationalize what my body was trying to scream. The tremor in my right hand appeared next. Subtle at first, a coffee cup that rattled against the saucer, my signature going shaky on documents I used to sign with confidence. I flexed my fingers, squeezed them into fists, willing the weakness away. It had to be stress. Mark and I had been arguing more lately, the tension in our house thick enough to choke on. Of course my body would react. The exhaustion was the worst part. Not the kind that comes from a busy day, but something deeper, heavier, like I was wading through water even when I stood still. By afternoon, my bones felt hollow, my muscles like they'd been wrung out and left to dry. I started leaving work early, telling colleagues I had appointments. The truth felt too fragile to speak aloud. Then came the fall. I was walking from the bedroom to the kitchen, a distance I'd crossed 1,000 times without thought. My right leg simply gave out, folding beneath me like paper. The hardwood rushed up to meet my hands and knees, the impact jarring through my wrists. I stayed there for a moment, breathless, staring at the floor grain beneath my palms. Just tired, I thought. Just need to rest. But fear had begun its slow crawl up my spine. The doctor's office smelled like antiseptic and old magazines. I sat in the waiting room, my hands clasped tight in my lap to stop them shaking. When they called my name, I forced a smile, walked carefully to keep my legs steady. The physician was kind, patient, asking questions I answered with half-truths. Yes, I'd been tired. No, nothing hurt exactly. Just some weakness. Probably overwork. But I saw the way the nurse looked at me when I described the numbness, the way her pen paused on her notepad, the way she glanced at the doctor with something that looked uncomfortably like concern. They ordered tests, blood work, an MRI. The words felt distant, like they were meant for someone else. I nodded, took the paperwork, promised to schedule everything. In the parking lot, I sat in my car with the engine off. My phone lay in my lap, Mark's number already pulled up on the screen. I needed to tell him. This was the kind of thing a wife shared with her husband. But my thumb hovered over the call button, unable to press down. What would I even say? That something was wrong with me, but I didn't know what. That my body was betraying me in ways I couldn't name. That I was afraid of the answers the tests might bring. The uncertainty felt worse than any diagnosis could be. I pictured his face when I'd tell him, the way his jaw would tighten, the way he'd look at me differently, not as his wife, but as a problem to solve. Or worse, a problem he couldn't solve. Our marriage had been fraying at the edges already, held together by routine and avoidance. This felt like it might snap whatever fragile threads remained. So I locked my phone and drove home in silence. The setting sun painted the dashboard gold, beautiful and indifferent. My legs felt distant beneath me, my hands uncertain on the wheel. Tomorrow I'd call for those test appointments. Tomorrow I'd figure out what to say to Mark. Tomorrow I'd face whatever this was. But today, I would let myself pretend everything was fine. The neurologist's office was smaller than I expected. Beige walls, diplomas in dark frames, a desk cluttered with files that probably held other people's catastrophes. I sat across from Dr. Patterson, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking, trying to read his face as he reviewed my MRI results on his computer screen. When he finally turned to me, his expression was careful, practiced. The kind of gentle that comes before bad news. The words he spoke felt muffled, like I was hearing them underwater. Multiple sclerosis, the possibility of, the pattern of lesions. the need for further confirmation. I nodded at the appropriate moments, my face arranged in what I hoped looked like calm understanding, while inside something fundamental was cracking apart. He explained what would come next: a lumbar puncture to analyze my spinal fluid, more blood work, another MRI in a few months to track progression. I wrote nothing down. The pen sat useless in my trembling fingers. The MRI machine became my nightmare 3 days later. They slid me into the tunnel like I was being swallowed. The space pressed close around my shoulders, the curved white walls too near my face. I tried to keep my eyes closed, to breathe slowly like the technician instructed, but panic crawled up my throat anyway. The machine began its assault, mechanical thunder, rhythmic pounding that seemed to come from inside my skull. Each bang felt like a judgment, like the universe confirming what I already knew deep in my bones. Tears leaked from the corners of my eyes, sliding hot down my temples into my hair. I couldn't wipe them away. Couldn't move. Could only lie there while the machine documented the evidence of my body's betrayal, mapping the scars scattered across my brain and spine like landmines waiting to detonate. 30 minutes that lasted a lifetime. The confirmation came on a Thursday afternoon. Dr. Patterson called personally rather than having his nurse deliver the news. I appreciated that, in a distant sort of way. His voice was steady, compassionate, as he walked me through the results. The spinal tap showed elevated proteins. The MRI revealed multiple lesions in both my brain and spinal cord, some old, some new. The diagnosis was definitive now: multiple sclerosis. Relapsing remitting type. We'd need to discuss treatment options, disease-modifying therapies, lifestyle adjustments. I thanked him, made an appointment for the following week, hung up the phone with hands that felt disconnected from my body. Then I sat on my kitchen floor and stared at nothing. The house was silent except for the refrigerator's hum and the distant sound of traffic outside. Mark would be home in 2 hours. I should start dinner. Should figure out how to tell him. Should do something other than sit here with my back against the cabinet, knees pulled to my chest, trying to understand how my entire future had just collapsed into uncertainty. But I couldn't make myself move. When Mark came home, I was at the stove stirring pasta sauce, my expression carefully neutral. He asked about my day in that distracted way he had lately, already scrolling through his phone. I told him it was fine. Work was busy. The usual things. He nodded without really listening, loosened his tie, poured himself bourbon. I watched him from across the kitchen and knew I couldn't tell him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because I'd seen the way he looked at weakness. The way he'd pulled back when his father got sick, finding reasons to avoid visits, changing the subject when his mother called. The way he valued strength, control, perfection. I'd built myself into the image of what he wanted: capable, independent, flawless. And now I was breaking. The diagnosis sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold. Multiple sclerosis, a disease with no cure, a future of uncertainty, relapses and remissions, symptoms that could range from manageable to catastrophic. I might be fine for years, or I might lose the ability to walk, to see, to control my own body. I couldn't give him that burden. Couldn't watch him decide whether to stay or leave. Couldn't see the calculation in his eyes as he weighed his options. So I smiled when he kissed my cheek. Served dinner. Made conversation about his day at the office, and I carried the weight of my shattered world alone. It happened at 2 a.m. I woke to use the bathroom, my bladder insistent, pulling me from restless dreams. The bedroom was dark except for the blue glow of Mark's phone charger. I pushed back the covers and tried to swing my legs over the edge of the bed. They wouldn't move. Not the usual weakness I'd been managing. This was different. Complete. My legs lay useless beneath me, heavy as concrete, disconnected from any signal my brain tried to send. I stared down at them in the darkness, willing them to respond, to do something, anything. Nothing. Panic arrived fast and brutal. My chest tightened, breath coming in short gasps that didn't seem to bring any oxygen. The room tilted. I tried again to move my legs, straining until sweat broke across my forehead, but they remained dead weight against the mattress. I was trapped in my own body. My hands scrambled for my phone on the nightstand, nearly knocking over the lamp. Mark was at his brother's place for poker night. My fingers shook so badly I could barely unlock the screen, could barely hit his contact, could barely hold the phone to my ear as it rang once, twice, 3 times. He answered with irritation already in his voice, music and male laughter in the background. I tried to explain, tried to keep my voice steady, but the words came out fractured, desperate. I couldn't get up. Something was wrong. I needed him. The 40-minute wait felt eternal. I lay there in the dark, my useless legs stretched before me, tears sliding into my hair as I tried to breathe through the terror. This was it. This was the nightmare the doctors had warned about. A relapse. An exacerbation. My disease showing its teeth. When I finally heard his key in the door, relief flooded through me so powerfully I almost sobbed. His footsteps on the stairs were heavy, annoyed. He appeared in the bedroom doorway, still in his jacket, smelling of whiskey and cologne. The way he looked at me, not with concern, but with something colder, something that made my stomach drop, told me everything I needed to know. He asked what was wrong, but the question felt like an accusation. I explained again about my legs, about not being able to move, about needing help. His jaw tightened. He crossed his arms. The silence between us stretched thin and dangerous. Then he said it. The words that would replay in my head for months afterward. He wasn't going to be my caretaker. He hadn't signed up for this. He had a life, a career, plans that didn't include being tied to an invalid. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. I lay there paralyzed, watching the man I'd married for 7 years look at me like I was a problem he needed to solve. Or worse, a problem he needed to escape. He didn't help me to the bathroom, didn't call an ambulance, didn't even sit down. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets and told me I needed to figure things out. That this wasn't fair to him. That he'd tried, but he couldn't do this anymore. I watched him turn and walk away. The sounds that followed were worse than his words. Drawers opening and closing, the slide of hangers, his suitcase being dragged from the closet. He moved through our home with mechanical efficiency, taking what was his, leaving what was ours. I heard him in the bathroom collecting toiletries, in his office gathering files. I called his name once. My voice came out broken, pleading. He didn't respond. The front door closed at 3:15. I know because I stared at the clock on the nightstand for the next 4 hours, unable to move, unable to sleep, unable to process what had just happened. By morning, feeling had started creeping back into my legs. Pins and needles, then dull aching. I managed to stand, to stumble to the bathroom, to splash cold water on my swollen face. The house felt enormous and empty around me. 2 days later, he came back. Not to check on me, not to apologize. He brought papers, divorce documents already filled out, already signed on his line, a neat little space waiting for my signature. He set them on the kitchen counter like he was delivering mail. He didn't even look at me when he left. I stood in my kitchen, still weak, still terrified, looking at those papers and understanding with perfect clarity that the man I'd loved had walked away from me the moment I became inconvenient. The moment I stopped being perfect. The moment I needed him most. The first morning alone, I couldn't get out of bed. Not because of my legs this time, though they still trembled with weakness. I couldn't get up because there was nowhere to go. Nothing that mattered. No point to the day stretching endlessly ahead. The ceiling above me had a water stain shaped like a bird. I stared at it for 3 hours before my bladder finally forced movement. The bathroom was 10 steps away. It took me 20 minutes. I gripped the doorframe, then the wall, then the sink, pulling myself forward with shaking arms while my legs dragged behind me like borrowed limbs. By the time I collapsed back into bed, sweat soaked through my nightgown and my heart hammered against my ribs. This was my life now. The house began its slow descent into chaos around me. Dishes piled in the sink because standing long enough to wash them felt impossible. Mail accumulated on the counter. Bills, advertisements, envelopes I couldn't bring myself to open. The trash overflowed. Dust settled on every surface like snow. I watched it happen with a strange detachment, as if I were observing someone else's collapse. I tried calling Mark on the third day. My finger hovered over his contact photo. Us on our honeymoon, younger versions of ourselves who still believed in forever. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What would I say? That I needed him? That I was scared? That our house felt like a tomb and I couldn't remember how to be a person anymore? I called again the next morning. This time it rang twice. The day after that, his number went straight to voicemail. He'd blocked me. The panic attacks started arriving without warning. I'd be sitting on the couch, staring at nothing, and suddenly my chest would tighten like a fist closing around my lungs. My vision would tunnel. The room would spin. I'd gasp for air that wouldn't come, convinced I was dying, that this was how it would end. Alone on the floor of a house that was falling apart, just like me. Food became theoretical. I knew I should eat, knew my body needed fuel, but the effort required felt insurmountable. Opening the refrigerator, preparing something, standing while it cooked. The exhaustion was a living thing, pressing down on me with physical weight. I survived on crackers eaten straight from the box, water drunk from the bathroom tap. On the 7th day, I fell in the kitchen. I'd been attempting to make coffee, a simple task I'd performed thousands of times without thought. But my hand trembled as I poured water into the machine, and when I turned, my right leg simply gave out. One moment I was standing. The next I was on the floor, my hip screaming where it had hit the tile, coffee grounds scattered around me like dark snow. I tried to get up, pushed with my arms, tried to lever myself to my knees. My muscles refused. They shook and collapsed, deposited me back on the cold floor again and again, until I was crying from frustration and pain and the sheer hopelessness of it all. So I stopped trying. I lay there on the kitchen floor, staring at the underside of the counter, at the dust and crumbs accumulated in corners I'd never noticed before. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. Time moved strangely, stretching and compressing until I couldn't tell if minutes or hours had passed. The sun moved across the floor in a slow arc. Morning light gave way to afternoon shadows. My phone was somewhere upstairs, useless. The landline on the wall might as well have been on the moon. I thought about Mark finding me like this. Then I remembered he wouldn't be coming. He was gone, had walked away without looking back, had chosen himself over me the moment I became inconvenient, the moment I needed him instead of serving him. And I was alone. Completely, utterly alone in a body that was betraying me, in a house that was becoming a prison, in a life I no longer recognized. The future stretched ahead dark and uncertain, an endless corridor of falls and failures, of things I used to do easily becoming impossible, of being trapped inside myself with no one to help and no way out. Somewhere around sunset, I finally managed to crawl to the wall and pull myself upright. My entire body shook with the effort, but I made it. I stood, and standing felt like both a victory and a defeat. The knocking pulled me from a half-sleep I didn't remember falling into. 3 gentle raps on the front door, then silence. I lay on the couch where I'd collapsed hours earlier, or was it yesterday, staring at the ceiling, willing the sound to go away. It came again. Persistent, but not aggressive. Patient. I considered ignoring it. Let whoever it was assume I wasn't home, give up, leave me to my decay. But something in the rhythm of that knocking felt different from the urgency of bill collectors or the cheerful persistence of salespeople. Getting to the door took everything I had. I pulled myself upright, steadied against the arm of the couch, shuffled forward with one hand trailing along the wall for balance. My reflection in the hallway mirror was startling. Hollow-eyed, unwashed, wearing the same clothes I'd had on for 3 days. The man on my porch was maybe 50, with gray threading through dark hair and eyes that were kind without being pitying. I recognized him vaguely. The neighbor from 2 houses down who kept his lawn immaculate and always waved when he saw me. Michael something. We'd never spoken beyond pleasantries. He asked if I was all right. Not in the performative way people ask when they don't actually want to know, but with genuine concern that made my throat tighten. He'd heard a crash the night before. Had I fallen? Was I hurt? The lie formed automatically on my tongue. I was fine, just clumsy, nothing to worry about. But when I opened my mouth, what came out instead was the truth, raw and broken. I wasn't all right. I hadn't been all right in weeks. He didn't flinch, didn't look uncomfortable or make excuses to leave. He asked if he could come in, if I needed help with anything. The gentleness in his voice nearly undid me completely. I let him in. He moved through my disaster of a house with quiet efficiency, not commenting on the chaos, just methodically addressing it. Dishes went into the dishwasher. Trash got bagged and taken out. He asked permission before touching anything, gave me space while still being present. When he opened the refrigerator and found it nearly empty, he disappeared for 20 minutes and returned with groceries. Simple things: bread, eggs, fruit, soup. He made me scrambled eggs while I sat at the kitchen table, too exhausted to protest, watching this stranger care for me with more tenderness than my husband had shown in years. It was only when he helped me stand that I noticed the confidence in his hands, the professional way he assessed my balance and adjusted his support. When I asked, he explained he'd been a physical therapist before retiring early. An injury, his spine, years of repetitive stress, had ended his career and taught him what it meant to lose the body you'd counted on. The understanding in his eyes was profound and uncomforting in its intimacy. He knew, not just intellectually, but in the way only someone who'd walked through that particular darkness could know. He didn't ask what was wrong with me, didn't pry into why I was alone or where my husband had gone. He simply showed up. Came back the next day with more groceries, the day after that to help me shower, clinical and respectful, treating me with dignity when I felt I had none left. He started coming every morning. Not for long, just an hour to check in, help with tasks that had become mountains, remind me that I still existed as a person worthy of care. He brought order to the chaos not by fixing everything, but by showing me I didn't have to face it all alone. For the first time since my diagnosis, since Mark's abandonment, since my body became a prison, I felt something other than despair. Not hope exactly. That felt too fragile, too presumptuous. But maybe its precursor. A crack in the darkness. The faintest possibility that survival might be more than just enduring. Michael never asked for anything in return. Never made me feel like a burden or a charity case. He just showed up, day after day, and reminded me through quiet action that kindness still existed in the world, that I deserved it, that maybe, somehow, I could find my way back from the edge I'd been teetering on. And slowly, impossibly, I began to believe him. It started with my left eye. I woke that morning and the world was wrong. Half of it had simply vanished, replaced by a gray fog that no amount of blinking would clear. I covered my right eye experimentally, and panic seized my chest. My left eye saw almost nothing, just shadows and shapes, the bedroom reduced to smudges of color swimming in murk. The pain came next. Not in the eye itself, but behind it, deep in the socket, sharp and persistent like someone was pressing their thumb into my skull. When I tried to look left or right, the pain spiked, sending nausea rolling through my stomach. I reached for my phone with trembling hands, but before I could dial, my legs gave out completely. Not the usual weakness, not the tremor and unsteadiness I'd learned to manage. This was total. I tried to stand, and my legs folded like they'd been cut loose from their strings. I crashed to the floor beside the bed, the impact jarring through my shoulder, and when I tried to push myself up, nothing happened. My legs lay beneath me, useless, dead weight attached to a body that couldn't command them. Michael found me there 20 minutes later when I didn't answer his morning knock. He had a key now for emergencies. This qualified. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and questions I could barely answer through my terror. The paramedics asked me to track their finger with my eyes, to squeeze their hands, to tell them what I could see. The answers seemed to alarm them in ways they tried to hide with professional calm. The hospital swallowed me whole. Tests came in waves, more MRIs, blood draws, neurological assessments. Doctors with serious faces pressed on my feet, ran cold instruments up my legs, shone lights in my failing eye. I heard them speaking in low voices just outside my room, medical terminology I'd learned too well over the past months. Acute exacerbation, aggressive progression, significant new lesions. They started high-dose steroids immediately, pumping methylprednisolone through an IV that made my heart race and my thoughts spiral. The neurologist explained about plasmapheresis. They'd filter my blood, remove the antibodies attacking my nervous system. It might help, it might not. They wouldn't know for days, maybe weeks. I lay in the hospital bed with one eye that barely worked and legs that wouldn't move, and felt myself sliding toward an abyss I might not climb back from. The third night, I heard them talking outside my door. 2 doctors changing shifts, their voices carrying clearly through the thin walls. One mentioned my case, aggressive relapse, poor response to steroids so far, extensive spinal involvement. The other asked about prognosis. The word that followed was one I'd been avoiding since my diagnosis, holding it at arm's length like something too terrible to touch directly. Disability. Permanent disability. If the inflammation didn't respond to treatment, if the damage to my optic nerve was severe, if my legs didn't regain function, wheelchair, possibly, loss of vision, potentially, quality of life significantly impacted. They were talking about me like I was already gone, like the person I'd been had already died, and they were just discussing the corpse. Michael came every day. He sat beside my bed reading aloud from books he'd brought, his voice steady and calm when mine had been reduced to whispers. He didn't tell me everything would be fine, didn't offer false hope or empty platitudes. He just stayed, existed beside me in the space where my terror lived. The plasmapheresis was brutal. They ran my blood through a machine that separated it into components, filtering out the parts of me that were attacking myself, putting the rest back in. It left me exhausted in ways I didn't know were possible, like they'd drained some essential element along with the antibodies. On the 6th day, I could see light through my left eye. Vague shapes. Nothing clear, but more than the gray void had been. On the 8th day, I felt pins and needles in my right foot. The neurologist was cautiously optimistic. The inflammation was responding, slowly. I might regain significant function. Might. The word hung heavy with all the uncertainty I'd learned to live with. There were no guarantees with this disease, no promises, just endless might-be's and wait-and-sees. They kept me for 2 weeks total. By the time they discharged me, I could walk short distances with a walker, could see well enough to navigate. though colors looked washed out and everything had a strange, flat quality. My legs trembled with every step. My left eye ached constantly. But I was alive. Still here. Still fighting. Michael wheeled me out to his car, and I looked back at the hospital entrance with something between gratitude and grief. I'd survived this crisis, but I knew now, with absolute certainty, that this disease could take everything from me. That the next relapse might be the one I didn't recover from. That I was living on borrowed time in a body I could no longer trust. The first week home from the hospital, Michael turned my living room into a rehabilitation center. He moved furniture to create clear pathways, installed grab bars in the bathroom, positioned a sturdy chair near the couch where I could practice standing. Every morning at 9, he arrived with the quiet determination of someone who'd walked this road before, and knew exactly how grueling it would be. Sitting upright was the first challenge. Something I'd done thoughtlessly my entire life suddenly required conscious effort, muscle control I no longer possessed. Michael positioned me on the edge of the couch, feet flat on the floor, and asked me to sit without support for 30 seconds. I lasted 12 before my core gave out, and I listed sideways. We tried again, and again. Each attempt ending with my body collapsing in directions I couldn't prevent, muscles firing erratically or not at all. By the end of that first session, I could manage 23 seconds. The victory felt microscopic and monumental at once. The spoon became my nemesis. My hands trembled so badly that lifting soup to my mouth resulted in more spillage than sustenance. Michael sat across from me at meals, not helping, just watching patiently as I struggled with the physics of coordination my nervous system could no longer master. Fork to plate, food to fork, fork to mouth. Each step a calculated effort that used to be automatic. The day I got through an entire bowl of soup without assistance, I cried into the empty dish. Balance came next, or the attempt at it. Michael had me stand against the wall, then gradually step away. 6 inches, then a foot, then 2, seeing how long I could remain upright before my legs betrayed me. The floor became intimately familiar. I fell more times than I could count, each impact a reminder of how far I'd fallen in every sense. But Michael never let me stay down. He helped me up, reset me, told me to try again. No pity in his voice. No false encouragement. Just steady expectation that I would keep fighting. Walking was the mountain I couldn't see the top of. 2 steps. That was the goal Michael set the second week. Just 2 steps without the walker, holding nothing, trusting my legs to support me. I stood against the wall, staring at the chair positioned impossibly far away, maybe 4 feet that looked like miles. 1 step. My right leg moved forward, shaking but functional. Weight shifted. The world tilted dangerously. 2nd step. My left leg followed, and for a heartbeat I was walking, actually walking. And then my knee buckled and I was falling and Michael caught me, lowered me carefully to the chair. 2 steps. I'd done it. The progress was agonizingly slow. Some days my body responded better than others. Some mornings I woke with strength I'd lost the day before. Other times I regressed, lost ground, spent entire sessions unable to accomplish what I'd managed the week prior. The unpredictability of my disease meant every small victory came with the terror that it might be temporary. Michael tracked everything in a notebook. How long I could stand, how many steps I managed, which exercises showed improvement. The data helped when my mind couldn't see past the day's failures. He'd show me the numbers, the gradual upward trend hidden beneath the daily chaos. 3 weeks in, I stood from the couch unassisted. My legs shook, my vision swam, but I rose from sitting to standing using only my own strength, and stayed upright for a full minute before sitting back down. Michael smiled. Actually smiled. The first real one I'd seen from him. The emotional toll was harder than the physical. Every small task I relearned reminded me of what I'd lost, how far I'd fallen, how uncertain my future remained. I'd been capable once, independent, strong. Now I celebrated holding a spoon steady and taking 2 steps without falling. Some nights I lay in bed and felt the enormity of it crushing me. The knowledge that this might be as good as I got, that the next relapse could erase everything I'd fought to regain, that I was building myself back up on foundations that could crumble without warning. But morning always came, and with it Michael, and we'd start again. 4 steps became 6. 6 became 10. Standing for 1 minute became 5. The walker gave way to a cane. The bathroom grab bars went from essential to precautionary. Slowly, incrementally, I was reclaiming pieces of myself. Not the person I'd been. That woman was gone, and I was learning to grieve her. But maybe someone new. Someone forged in this fire. Someone who knew the value of 2 steps, of a spoonful of soup, of 30 seconds sitting upright. Someone who was still here, still fighting, still standing. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after I'd come home from the hospital. Plain white, no return address, but I recognized Mark's handwriting on the front. My name written in his careful block letters, the same script he'd used on our wedding invitations, on birthday cards, on the divorce papers he'd left on my kitchen counter. I stared at it for an hour before opening it. Michael had just left after our morning session. I was exhausted, muscles trembling from the effort of walking the length of my hallway 3 times without the cane. The envelope sat on the coffee table in front of me, radiating possibility and threat in equal measure. When I finally tore it open, the letter inside was brief. Typed, not handwritten, as if he couldn't bring himself to make it personal. The words were exactly what part of me had been desperate to hear, and exactly what I should have expected. He'd been wrong. He'd reacted poorly. He wanted to try again. He was ready to be there for me. He missed me. We could work through this together. My hands shook holding the paper. Not from my disease this time, from something deeper, more dangerous. The pull of old patterns, old promises, the muscle memory of 7 years together. I could almost see him as I read, contrite, earnest, wearing the expression he used when he wanted something and knew he had to work for it. The rational part of my brain cataloged all the reasons this was manipulation. He'd left me paralyzed on the floor, told me I was a burden he wouldn't carry, brought divorce papers while I was still struggling to walk, blocked my number when I'd needed him most. These weren't the actions of someone who loved me. These were the actions of someone who discarded me when I became inconvenient. But another part of me, smaller and more wounded, whispered different things. Maybe he'd panicked. Maybe seeing me actually sick, actually failing, had overwhelmed him and he'd run. But now he'd had time to process. Maybe people could change. Maybe he really did miss me. Maybe I could have my life back. My marriage, my home with someone who knew me, the future I'd planned before everything fell apart. The loneliness whispered loudest. 6 weeks of relying on a neighbor who barely knew me. 6 weeks of learning to walk again, to hold a spoon, to exist in a body that betrayed me daily. 6 weeks of facing an uncertain future completely alone. Mark was offering an end to that isolation. A partner. Help. Someone who'd promised to love me in sickness and health, even if he'd failed the first test. I read the letter 3 more times, each pass finding new meaning in the sparse sentences. He'd included his new number at the bottom. "Just call when you're ready to talk," he'd written. "I'm here." My phone sat beside the envelope. I picked it up twice, pulled up the keypad, started entering the number. Both times I stopped before finishing, heart pounding, mouth dry. What would I say? What did I want from him? Forgiveness felt impossible, but so did this endless solitude. I'd loved him once. Deeply. Completely. That didn't just vanish because he'd shown me who he really was in a crisis. Or did it? Should it? The memories were treacherous. Our wedding day. Him crying when I came down the aisle. The way he'd held me when my mother died. Lazy Sunday mornings and inside jokes and the comfortable rhythm of a life built together. That version of Mark felt real in a way his cruelty didn't, even though I knew intellectually that both were true. I thought about Michael's face if I told him Mark had reached out. The disappointment he'd be too kind to show. The concern that I was making a mistake. But Michael didn't understand what it was like to face this disease knowing the person who was supposed to stand beside me had walked away. He didn't know the fear that came with every step I took, wondering if this would be the last time I managed it, if the next relapse would leave me truly helpless with no one but a neighbor's charity to rely on. Mark was offering certainty, or the illusion of it. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Put it in my nightstand drawer where I wouldn't have to look at it but wouldn't throw it away either. I didn't call that day. Didn't delete the number. Just carried the weight of the decision, the terrible pull between what I wanted to believe and what I knew to be true. And tried not to think about how desperately I wanted to stop being so completely alone. I recognized the lawyer's envelope before I even opened it. A pale, businesslike thing among the stack of bills and clinic reminders. My hands trembled as I slid my finger under the seal, dread blooming in my chest, cold and familiar. There was only one person who would take this route now. Only one with anything left to take. The letter was clinical, precise, its language sharpened by someone else's intent. It took me 2 readings to make sense of the legal terms, and another 3 to believe them. Mark had gone to court. He wasn't just divorcing me. He was petitioning to have me declared legally incapacitated. He'd requested that the house be signed over to him, that I be left with only the legal minimum, that all other assets fall under his control. Each sentence was a new slap in the face. Each legal phrase a fresh layer of humiliation. Some part of me had expected anger, or even greed if our divorce became contentious, but this was something colder, deliberate erasure through the legal system. It wasn't real at first. My name attached to words like incapacitated, incompetent to manage assets, transfer of property. It felt like being put on trial not for something I'd done, but for being ill, for needing help, for being physically vulnerable. He'd told his story to the courts with ruthless efficiency, cataloging every instance of my disease as evidence. The falls, the hospitalizations, the months I'd been unable to stand. His petition was a document of my worst, weakest days. A lawyer, court-appointed, to ensure my interests were represented, called to go over the filings and my rights. She spoke gently but with that same clinical detachment, listing options like checkboxes. I could contest his statements with medical records, refute his claims with testimony from my doctors, gather proof that I could make decisions for myself. The process would be slow, public, and expensive. She assured me the facts were in my favor, but I needed to fight back. If I didn't, the court would take his word for truth. I hung up and felt something inside of me. A last, brittle memory of hope. Simply snap. The letter from Mark, offering reconciliation, still sat in my nightstand. Now I understood. He hadn't reached out for love. He'd wanted to make sure the fight would be easy, that I would be too grateful, too vulnerable to defend myself. His claim about wanting to support me was just a smokescreen, a way to clear his conscience and lay groundwork for what came next. A wave of anger pushed the shame aside. Sharp, clean, red-hot. It was different from the despair and disappointment that had followed me since the day he left. This was rage born of betrayal so deep it almost set me free. I retrieved every medical paper with my name on it, every discharge summary and letter from my neurologist, every piece of documentation that proved who I was before and after illness. I called my lawyer back, my voice steady. I told her I would fight, that I was competent, that he would not win. Not because he was right, but because I refused to let him erase me. For the first time in months, I saw myself not as a victim, but as someone enduring, someone transforming. Mark's betrayal clarified things I'd let stay blurry out of habit or loneliness. I would never go back. Not to him, not to the version of myself that begged for scraps of love. His actions stripped away the last illusions, leaving only truth and the rough, honest work of starting again. When I finished preparing my documents, I felt something almost like relief. The legal process ahead would be endless, exhausting, but I'd already survived worse. Every threat in those legal filings was an echo of the voice in my own mind I was finally ready to silence. I am not less because I am sick. I am not finished because you want me to be. This was the cost of my freedom. And for the first time since my body first betrayed me, I believed I might truly be free. Michael told me on a gray Thursday morning, 3 months after he'd first knocked on my door. We were in my living room, finishing our session. I'd just walked the full length of the house without assistance, 23 steps, the most I'd managed since the hospital. I was catching my breath on the couch, proud and exhausted, when I noticed him standing by the bookshelf, staring at a photograph I'd nearly forgotten was there. It was old, faded at the edges. Me at maybe 8 years old, standing beside a hospital bed, holding my mother's hand. The photo had been taken weeks before she died, before the cancer had stolen the last of her strength. I kept it there as a reminder of where I'd come from, though I rarely looked at it anymore. Michael's expression was strange, distant and pained in a way I'd never seen. When he spoke, his voice carried weight I couldn't quite place. He asked if I remembered St. Anthony's Medical Center, if I remembered the oncology wing. Of course I did. Those sterile corridors were burned into my memory, every detail sharp even after decades. He'd been there too, he said. An intern in his first year of residency, assigned to the oncology rotation. He remembered my mother, remembered the quiet dignity with which she'd faced her diagnosis, the way she'd insisted on reading to me during my visits, even when speaking exhausted her. And he remembered me. A small girl who sat perfectly still in the visitor's chair, trying to be brave, trying not to let her mother see how terrified she was. The revelation hit me like cold water. All this time, every morning he'd shown up, every meal he'd prepared, every hour spent helping me relearn to walk, he'd known. Not just about illness in the abstract, but about my specific history, my specific grief. He'd recognized my name when he moved to this neighborhood 3 years ago, had put together the pieces when he saw me. My first instinct was betrayal. Why hadn't he said something? Why let me believe he was just a kind neighbor when there was this whole history I hadn't known existed? But when I asked him, his answer was simple and devastating. He hadn't wanted me to feel like charity, hadn't wanted our relationship built on pity or some sense of obligation to the memory of a patient from decades past. He'd waited, he said, hoping that by the time I learned the truth, I'd already know that his care for me was real, not a debt to my mother, but a choice he made every day because he'd come to care about me, the person I was now. He'd been looking for a way to give back, he admitted. Not just to me, but to something larger. He'd left medicine after his injury feeling like a failure, like all those years of training had been wasted. When he saw me struggling, alone and afraid in ways that mirrored that 8-year-old girl in the oncology ward, something in him recognized the opportunity not to fix the past, but to honor it. To show up for someone the way he wished he could have done more for my mother, for all the patients he'd had to leave behind. I sat with this knowledge, turning it over in my mind like a stone. Part of me wanted to be angry, to feel manipulated, but the larger part recognized the profound gift he'd given me. Not just his help, but his discretion. He'd let me maintain my dignity, let me believe I was simply someone worth helping, rather than a project born from guilt or nostalgia. The connection between us shifted in that moment, deepening into something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't romance. Neither of us were looking for that. But it was profound in its own way. He'd witnessed both versions of me. The frightened child watching her mother die, and the woman fighting to reclaim her life after her body and her marriage had betrayed her. He'd seen the through line, the core of who I was beneath the circumstances that had tried to break me. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt truly seen, not as a patient or a victim or a burden, but as someone whose story had meaning, whose struggle had worth. Michael had given me back something I thought I'd lost forever, the sense that I mattered beyond my ability to function, beyond my usefulness to others. We sat in comfortable silence, the photograph between us, connecting past and present in ways I was only beginning to understand. And I realized that redemption comes in unexpected forms. Not always in grand gestures, but in quiet consistency. In showing up. In caring without conditions. In remembering. The rehabilitation center smelled like antiseptic and effort, a scent I'd grown to associate with both suffering and hope. 4 months after my hospitalization, I stood in the physical therapy gym surrounded by parallel bars, mirrors, and equipment designed to rebuild broken bodies. Michael sat on a bench near the wall, far enough to give me space but close enough that I knew he was there. Watching. Believing. My physical therapist, a woman named Sandra with kind eyes and no-nonsense hands, had positioned me at one end of the walkway. No walker this time. No cane. Just my legs, my determination, and the 20 feet of empty space stretching before me like an ocean. I'd been building to this moment for weeks, adding distance, reducing support, strengthening muscles that had atrophied during my worst days. But knowing I was ready and actually doing it were separated by a chasm of fear. What if I fell? What if my legs gave out halfway and I crumpled to the floor in front of everyone? What if this was as far as I could go? Sandra's voice cut through my spiral. She reminded me to breathe, to trust my body, to remember how far I'd already come. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and took my first step. My right foot moved forward. Weight shifted. The muscles in my leg fired properly, holding me steady. I didn't fall. Second step. Left foot. The familiar tremor was there, the weakness that never fully left, but beneath it I felt something stronger. The foundation Michael and I had built through countless mornings of 2 steps, then 4, then 10. Third step. Fourth. Fifth. My vision blurred with tears, but I kept moving. Each step was a declaration, a reclamation of something that had been stolen from me. Not just the ability to walk, but the belief that I could. That I was more than my disease, more than the body that had betrayed me, more than the woman my husband had abandoned when she needed him most. 10 steps. Halfway there. My legs were shaking now, fatigue building in muscles still learning to carry me. The parallel bars stood ready on either side, offering safety if I needed it. My hands twitched with the instinct to reach out, to hold on, to accept help. But I didn't. I kept walking. 15 steps. My breathing was ragged, tears streaming freely down my face now. I could hear Sandra encouraging me, could sense Michael leaning forward on his bench, could feel the attention of other patients and therapists in the gym all focused on this moment. 18 steps. 19. 20. I reached the end and my knees buckled, but this time it wasn't from weakness. It was from the sheer overwhelming weight of what I'd just accomplished. I caught myself on the wall, slid down to sitting, and let the sobs come. Great heaving cries that were equal parts exhaustion and triumph, grief and joy, ending and beginning. Sandra was there immediately, her hand on my shoulder, telling me I'd done it, that I'd walked the full distance unassisted. But her words felt distant compared to the truth flooding through me. I'd done it. Not my medication, not my doctors, not even Michael, though his help had been essential. Me. My stubborn, broken, beautiful body that refused to quit even when quitting would have been easier. Michael approached slowly, giving me space to have this moment. When our eyes met, I saw tears on his face too. Not pity, not relief. Just pure recognition of what this victory meant. Not just physically, but spiritually. I'd reclaimed something fundamental. Not the person I'd been before MS, before Mark's betrayal, before the falls and the hospital, and the terror of losing myself entirely. I'd become someone new. Someone forged in the fire of the worst months of my life. Someone who knew exactly how much 20 steps could cost, and exactly how much they were worth. My strength had never been in my legs. It had been in my refusal to surrender even when surrender seemed like the only option. In showing up every morning even when I couldn't see the point. In taking one more step when every fiber of my being screamed to stop. The standing, the walking, these were just the outward manifestation of something deeper. A core of determination that disease and betrayal and fear had tested but not broken. I pulled myself up using the wall, stood on trembling legs that had just carried me 20 feet, and looked at my reflection in the gym's mirror. The woman staring back was thinner, older, marked by struggle in ways that went beyond the physical. But she was standing, and she was free. Mark arrived on a Saturday afternoon, 6 months after he'd left me paralyzed on our bedroom floor. I was in the garden, deadheading roses, a task that would have been impossible 3 months ago. My legs were steady beneath me, my balance solid enough that I barely thought about falling anymore. The cane leaned against the porch railing, more security blanket than necessity these days. I heard the car door close and turned to see him walking up the front path. He'd lost weight, looked older somehow, wore the expression of someone practicing contrition in the mirror. For a moment, seeing him felt surreal. This man who'd shared my life for 7 years, who'd promised forever and delivered abandonment when I needed him most. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, taking in the sight of me standing upright, working in the garden, alive and functional in ways he'd assumed I'd never be again. I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. Surprise, then something that looked almost like disappointment. He started talking before I could speak. The words came rehearsed, carefully constructed. He'd made mistakes, panicked when he should have stayed strong. He'd been thinking about us, about our marriage, about giving things another chance. He mentioned counseling, commitment, the vows we'd taken. Family, he said. We were family. Didn't that mean something? I stood there holding my gardening shears, dirt under my fingernails, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no longing, no residual love or bitterness or hope. Just a calm, clear understanding of exactly who he was and what he wanted. He'd seen the legal papers, knew his petition to have me declared incompetent had failed, knew I'd kept the house, the assets, everything he'd tried to take. And now I was walking, functional, no longer the burden he'd fled from, or the victim he'd tried to exploit. He wanted back in because I was useful again, because I'd survived despite him, not because of him, because I represented something he could possess rather than someone he needed to support. I let him finish his speech, let him paint his picture of reconciliation and second chances. When he finally stopped talking, silence settled between us. The same uncomfortable quiet that had filled our house in the months before my diagnosis, when we'd both known the marriage was ending but neither of us had the courage to say it. Then I spoke. My voice was steady, certain, carrying a strength I'd earned through 4 months of learning to stand again. I told him the truth he needed to hear. He'd walked away when I was falling. When I'd needed him most, when those vows he now invoked actually mattered, he'd chosen himself. He'd tried to take everything from me, my home, my assets, my dignity through the courts. He'd blocked my calls, delivered divorce papers, left me on the floor. And now I was standing. But not for him. Not because of him. Not with any part of him involved in the woman I'd become. I was standing for myself. For the mornings I'd forced myself out of bed when staying down felt easier. For the 2 steps that became 4, then 10, then 20. For Michael's quiet presence and my own stubborn refusal to surrender. For every fall I'd gotten up from, and every small victory I'd fought for when Mark had already written me off as lost. His face shifted through emotions, shock, then anger, then something that looked like genuine hurt. But I felt no satisfaction in it, no vindication. Just the clean finality of a door closing on a chapter that should have ended months ago. I told him to leave. Not with cruelty, but with absolute certainty. We were done. Had been done the moment he chose abandonment over partnership. No amount of rehearsed apologies or manipulative appeals to history would change that. He tried once more to argue, to convince, to negotiate. But I simply turned back to my roses, made it clear the conversation was over. After a long moment, I heard his footsteps on the path, the car door, the engine starting. I didn't watch him drive away. When Michael arrived for our afternoon walk, a ritual we'd maintained even as I'd needed him less, I told him what had happened. He didn't offer sympathy or congratulations, didn't make it bigger than it needed to be. Just asked if I was ready for our walk. We headed down the tree-lined street, my stride steady and sure, no assistive devices, no fear. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold, and I felt it. True freedom. Not just physical, though reclaiming my body had been essential, but deeper, emotional, spiritual. I'd been broken down to my foundation and rebuilt myself stronger, not the woman I'd been. That version was gone, and I'd finally stopped grieving her. But someone new. Someone who knew her own worth beyond her usefulness to others. Someone who understood that falling wasn't failure, and standing wasn't about proving anything to people who'd already counted her out. The street stretched ahead, familiar and full of possibility. I walked it with my head high, my legs steady, my future uncertain but entirely my own. And I was free.